On February 23rd, 1685, in the little town of Halle, Germany, a son, George Friedrich Handel, was born to a wealthy and elderly barber surgeon and his wife. The father wanted his son to grow up to be a lawyer and have wealth and social position. At a very young age, little George loved to hear the choirs that sang in the streets in front of the townspeople's homes. The Handel family attended church regularly. Neither the parents nor George's Aunt Anna, who cared for him, realized how the notes coming from the church organ fascinated the little boy. When he was 7 years old, George attended school. The principal of the school is known to have loved music, so perhaps young George received some musical instruction from him. At least George was encouraged to develop his great interest in music. It has been said that one night a small keyboard instrument, called a clavichord, was smuggled into the attic by George's Aunt Anna and some of her friends. At every opportunity, young George would practice playing the clavichord. No one knows whether this particular story is true, but it is known that the boy did learn to play a keyboard instrument while very young. When George was about 8 years old, he accompanied his father on a trip to the castle of a duke in a nearby town. Dr. Handel was the regular surgeon at the Duke's court. At the Duke's castle, George somehow had an opportunity to play the chapel organ. When the Duke heard the beautiful music, he ordered Dr. Handel to give the talented boy musical training. Dr. Handel was furious, but he dared not disobey this royal command. Back home, George began his musical studies with a Halle church organist who was an outstanding musician and composer. In 3 years' time, George had learned to play such instruments as the harpsichord, organ, oboe, and violin. In Berlin, at the age of 11, George performed at the court of the Elector of Brandenburg. The Elector and his wife were so impressed with the talented boy that they wrote to Dr. Handel telling him that they would take George into their service and send him to Italy for further musical training. When Dr. Handel received the letter, he was a sick old man. He absolutely refused to let his son become a musician. He ordered the boy to come home at once. Shortly after George returned, Dr. Handel died. Back home in Halle, young Handel became well known to the townspeople because of his musical ability, and his fame attracted the attention of noted musical visitors. At 17, Handel became a student at Halle University. He decided that music would be his life's work. The same year, he secured an appointment as organist of a large church in Halle. The organ was a fine instrument, and part of Handel's responsibility was to keep it in perfect working order. He also had to compose special music for church services. Soon after his 18th birthday, Handel, not satisfied to be an organist for the rest of his life, said goodbye to his family and set out for the city of Hamburg, a city noted for its great musical activity. There he hoped to make a name for himself in music. At one of the churches in Hamburg, Handel met a young organist and singer, John Matheson. They took turns playing the organ, all the while talking, laughing, and getting acquainted. This meeting was the beginning of a close friendship between the two men. To earn a living, Handel found a job as a violinist at the opera house. Here he had the opportunity to learn much about opera. Gradually, he was becoming known as a brilliant harpsichord player, an outstanding organist of his time, and a fine violinist. He spent his spare time composing, but few of these early compositions have survived. Handel's friend, John Matheson, had the leading singing role in an opera being performed. Handel was playing the harpsichord and conducting the orchestra. As soon as Matheson finished his singing, he would dash from the stage and take Handel's place at the harpsichord. Matheson wanted all the musical honors for himself as well as the singing honors. One night, Handel refused to leave the harpsichord, and they had a violent quarrel. Their argument continued outside in the marketplace where they began a duel. Luckily for Handel, Matheson's sword hit a hard button on Handel's coat and splintered in his hand. The duel quickly ended, and in a short time the two became friends again. Handel was only 19 years old when he conducted the orchestra in the performance of his first opera, Almira. The audience enthusiastically applauded the freshness and beauty of Handel's music. Almira was the first of more than 40 operas that Handel composed. A few months later, Handel traveled to Italy, and wherever he went, in Florence, Rome, Venice, or Naples, he was welcome and entertained by the nobility. He spent 3 years in Italy and became known as an excellent composer and musician. They called him the Saxon because he came from Saxony in Germany. A story is told that Handel, playing the harpsichord at a masked ball, was heard by Alessandro Scarlatti and his son, both famous harpsichordists and composers. Even though Handel was disguised, the son exclaimed to his father, "That is either the celebrated Saxon or Satan." At a theater in Venice, Handel's new opera called Agrippina was being performed. Night after night, carriages arrived, bringing enthusiastic Venetians to see and hear this opera, which made Handel famous throughout Europe. Handel became organist and choir director for the Elector of Hanover in Germany. Within a short while, Handel was granted a leave of absence to visit England. People in England welcomed Handel and praised his music highly. He played many concerts and composed a successful opera while there. At the end of the year, Handel had to return to his job in Hanover. But he had grown fond of England and resolved to return someday. Back in Hanover, Handel composed a great deal of chamber music to be played by the musicians at the German court. Chamber music is usually performed by 3, 4, or 5 musicians for a small gathering of people. But chamber music did not interest him as much as opera. He felt he must return to England, where opera was flourishing. The people of England welcomed Handel's return. Day by day, his fame and fortune increased. He had such a wonderful time there that he stayed long after the time he should have returned to his position at Hanover. About this time, the Elector of Hanover, Handel's former employer, was crowned King of England. The Queen of England had died, leaving no children to succeed her to the throne. Although the Elector was only a distant relative of the Queen, he was next in line for the throne. When the new king learned of Handel's fame as a great musician in England, he commissioned the 32-year-old composer to write special music for a forthcoming celebration. The celebration was a river party in which there was a procession of barges carrying royalty and noblemen. The king's barge was first in the procession, followed by the musician's barge playing the music Handel had written for the occasion. The king was so pleased with the music that he had it played several times. We know that music now as the water music. Having been appointed court composer to the king, Handel composed the music for a great many minuets for royal parties. A minuet is a slow, graceful dance that was popular in those days. During the next several years, Handel spent much of his time traveling. He continued to compose music of all kinds. One of his most famous melodies is the Largo from the opera Circes. The work for which Handel is best known is the famous oratorio, The Messiah. An oratorio is a musical work telling a religious story and is sung by a chorus and soloists. The Messiah tells the story of the life of Christ. King of peace and love. The king and his royal party attended the first performance of the Messiah when it was performed in London. Handel conducted the orchestra. When the king heard the magnificent strains of the Hallelujah chorus, he was so impressed that he stood up. It is now traditional that whenever the Hallelujah chorus is sung, the audience stands. At one time, the English people were preparing a special scaffold for a fireworks display to celebrate the end of a war. As part of this celebration, there was to be a concert for which Handel, now 65 years old, was to compose the music. Handel's orchestra played as scheduled, even though the celebration didn't work out as planned. All the framework for the fireworks burst into flames. Since that time, Handel's music for this event has been known as the Royal Fireworks Music. Handel continued to compose and play the organ until he was an old man. There are 136 volumes of his works in existence today. The music he wrote was grand but simple. George Frideric Handel was one of the greatest composers of all times.